Live. I'm reading my outline. And first possession is on page 1. Acquisition by discovery comes after to describe what is meant by first possession. Following that is a reference to Locke's labor theory of property on page 15. Taking property requires an act. So that's kind of like the labor theory. Act, labor. There's an occupancy theory that might just harken back to original possession. So these are some of the early theories behind real property. The first case was Johnson versus McIntosh, in which the issue addressed is an Indian conveyance recognizable in the U.S. judicial system? According to the discovery principle, which is not one I discussed before, but does require an act in labor to some extent. This fundamental and universal principle of discovery gave exclusive title to those who made it, even if it was occupied. Because the natives were uncivilized, they did not take possession of the property by making settlement, and the alternative would be title by conquest or oppression. And the precedent involved annulments to Indians. So this is a very early case, and it's trying to basically make ownership of property the English way in America, and by the theories that they have in their power to either to assert it. So acquisition by capture, again, still kind of goes down by, acquisition by discovery, that's probably the first section. Acquisition by capture is more of a personal property concept because it involves fere naturae, which is property in wild animals, is acquired by occupancy only, and that would mean to kill, carry away, or acquire control. I say or, but I don't know if it's an and an or. I assume it's an or. Ration soli is the landowner's constructive possession of the fere naturae. There is a couple more notes here. Malicious interference with trade, abuse of right, and hunter harassment on public land. Moving on to the next case is Pearson versus Post. I think this is the duck case. No, it's not. The issue is it a trespass to interfere with a fox hunt? What degree of the hunter's close pursuit renders diversion by a third party to be a trespass upon the hunter's right of possession - occupancy? And the rule applied is fere naturae is acquired by occupancy only, but to further build on what is occupancy, the principles were examined from Justinians of Feta, Bracton, Puffendorf, Beinkersoik, Barbeyrac, and Grotius. So we're talking like very ancient, maybe writers, is where this occupancy principle comes from. All of those were discussed, and according to the majority, there is no certainty that the fox would be acquired until it is deprived of its liberty, i.e. subdued, controlled, captured, and killed. Therefore, first possession is not obtained until the animal has been acquired and controlled. which would mean deprived of natural liberty. The minority opinion is the first possession is obtained by the first in pursuit of the fere naturae. The third case in the book was Jen versus Rich, and the issue was, can title to whale be acquired by an act of killing without carrying it away? If it is too big to acquire control or possession, and in lieu thereof, the usage and custom is for the owner of the harpoon to pay a fee to the person who finds the whale carcass on the land when it comes to shore. The analysis there was that the precedent case, Tabor versus Jenny, finding a whale being fere naturae, does not become property until a firm possession has been established by the taker. But when such possession has become firm and complete, the right of property is clear and has characteristic of property. Appropriation of whale must be free of fraud and deceit. The precedent case, Swift versus Gifford, offers no custom or responsibility on the libellant who finds the dead whale. And in the precedent case, Bourne versus Ashley, they consider the prevailing business interest to follow usage. So here they held first in time principle rules. Even if carrying off is not available, this is for the sake of public policy. Okay, the next case is the duck case. This is a menacing neighbor found guilty of interfering, disturbing with a decoy pond. The rule where a man has occupancy that is profitable and another man interferes, hinders in the trade therein, lies a cause of action. The analysis is that the decoy pond qualifies as trade because it was a profitable endeavor to the plaintiff in which he employs skill. Competition and fair trade is not a defense because competitors' act was indecent. So they're like looking at the fair trade argument, even though they're just neighbors. This decoy pond isn't producing anything besides the fact that the owner employs his skill in maintaining it. I don't spend too much time on this. None of it was on the bar. But it's very interesting. So, capture of wild animals. Popov versus Hayashi. Barry Bonds' record-setting 73rd home run ball was caught, but plaintiff was tackled and the ball was dislodged by attack and was recovered and pocketed by the defendant. The court issued a declaratory judgment that when the MLB abandoned the ball, there was a possessory interest in plaintiff and possessory interest in defendant when the ball's inertia stopped, like right in front of him, and he picked it up and pocketed it. So conversion is the wrongful exercise of dominion over the personal property of another, or wrongful withholding or actual interference with plaintiff dominion. Wrongful requires knowledge and intention for which defines an element, which is the wrongful exercise of dominion. What happened in that case is this case is known for splitting the baby, because they probably grappled with these crazy historic principles and decided that they should just force the two parties, Popov and Hayashi, to sell the ball and to split the profits. So that's splitting the baby. Capture of fugitive resources, right to be treated like fere naturae. The courts reason that oil and gas be determined in the same manner as the ownership of wild animals may be classed by themselves, if the analogy be not too fanciful, as minerals fere naturae. In common with animals and unlike other minerals, they have the power and the tendency to escape without the volition of the owner. They belong to the owner of the land and are part of it so long as they are in it or on it or in it, and are subject to his control. But when they escape and go into another land, or come under another's control, the title of the former owner is gone. Possession of the land, therefore, is not necessarily possession of the gas. If an adjoining or even a distant owner drills his own land and taps your gas so that it comes into his well and under his control, it is no longer yours, but his. From the Westmoreland and Cambria National Gas Oil vs. DeWitt from 1889. So we just talked about oil and gas, riparian land rights, surface water, and resources came from that DeWitt case. And Harold Demset's probably article titled Toward a Theory of Property Rights. I have written here some notes about it. Concept, role, emergence, real ownership of PR, which I don't know if that's personal realty, personal property. But under that, you see natural resources, wild animals, water and minerals, clean air, open space, peace and quiet. So property rights seek to internalize externalities. For example, unjust effects to society and occur when it becomes economic for those impacted by externalities to internalize them. I understand this because I read it. I don't know how to explain it beyond that. Example, hunting by native. Communal rights created insignificant externalities and therefore private property, not requirement to settle inequities. The fur trade, socioeconomic changes in property, for example, private hunting grounds to which retaliation for trespass existed. Extraction rules, matter of public policy. Now, externalities, trespassers should not, this might be a definition, trespassers should not economically benefit from wrong utilitarian theory of property, which is the basis, I want to say, for externalities. There's beneath this written compulsory unitation, free transferability policy, and the tragedy of anti-commons. So these are all chapter 1 concepts. Maybe just to mystify you about the idea of real property and where it came from and where it could go and why. Anyhow, Chapter 2 is titled Acquisition of Property by Subsequent Possession rather than First Possession. So find, adverse, possession, and gift is going to be discussed in this chapter. Lost property. Finder of lost property has superior right to it above the whole world except its true owner and previous possessors. Rationale. It prevents violence and self-help. There's consistent legal treatment and evidentiary. It is easier to prove. Mislaid property belongs to the possessor of property on which it is found, except in Bridges versus Hawkinsworth. Case 1, Armory versus Delamain. Facts. Chimney sweep finds jewel and goldsmith absconds jewels from it, and chimney sweep brings trover cause of action for money damages. That's the Armory versus Delamain case. Rule. Finder has right above everyone except proper owner and previous possessors in cases involving land as well as in cases involving personal property. Hannah versus Peel is the 15th case in this book. A soldier gave a brooch to the police that he found on August 1940 while residing in a home owned by Peel but never occupied by Peel. The soldier granted the brooch 2 years later and sold it for, I want to say 66 pounds. Resold for 88 pounds. I don't know if that's a pound symbol. It's just a lower. Here's L, I think. Peel brought replevin on 10 1943. To some extent, I feel like I should highlight some of this. Highlighter. So replevin and trover, right? Those are some terms of art. Not that I actually defined them, but here's the lost property and versus mislaid property. Extraction is a 25-cent word. I don't think it's a word of art. Fugitive resources. Conversion, which is the wrongful exercise of dominion over personal property of another, or wrongful withholding or actual interference with the plaintiff's dominion, and wrongful requires knowledge and intention. So here they ultimately got to possession of the land, therefore, is not necessarily possession of, oil and gas. And if it can be diverted, the diverter prevails, I'll just say, in the margin. And then from the first page, we got the fere naturae and the rational soli, but what's really kind of interesting here discovery gives title to those who made it. That's a concept. There's the occupancy theory comes later. Occupancy principle is that you need to subdue, control, capture, kill. And for the whale, you don't actually have to carry it away. So that's the occupancy theory. But Locke's labor theory is kind of more like the discovery principle, where you find discovery gave exclusive title to those who made the discovery, in the meaning that they're giving discovery. So back to this Bridges versus Hawkinsworth. These are preceding cases inside Hannah versus Peel. So basically part of the analysis. So was South Staffordshire Water versus Sharman. So was Elwes versus Brigg Gasco. McAvoy versus Medina. Michael versus Chicago Corp. So these are all lost and mislead, personal property cases. Reading through them, Bridges involved banknotes found on the ground by a commercial traveler and turned over to the shop. They were advertised, but when the true owner did not appear within 3 years, the finder was refused the banknotes and brought action, which was decided for the defendant based on the accidental laying mislaid of the banknotes down. But it was later declared that the location of the accidentally dropped property does not entitle shopkeeper possession, because protection of his principle does not apply when the shopkeeper never had custody but was given the banknotes by the finder for the purpose of advertising, because the true owner would be more inclined to look at that location for mislaid property. So the rule here is that the location of accidentally dropped property is irrelevant to the general rule that the finder of the lost article is entitled to it as against all persons except the real owner. Custody is an interesting word here, but this involves the location of mislaid property, right? Is irrelevant for overcoming the rule. Now, in South Staffordshire, the owner of land hired contractor to build a pool, and contractor found 2 rings on the land. The rule from Pollock and Wright's essay of Possession in common law, the possession of land carries with it possession of everything which is attached to or under that land or on or in that land, and in the absence of better title elsewhere, the right to possess it also. Locus in quo is best known for claim to chattel found. Ellis versus Brigasco. Facts. A prehistoric boat embedded in the soil was discovered by the lessees when they were digging to make a gas holder. In the analysis, the judge considered the boat to be chattel and not minerals leased by lessee, and therefore belonging to landowner per locus in quo. I don't even know what that means. Hey Siri, what is locus in quo?
Here's an answer from dictionary.com. Locus in quo definition. The place in which, the very place, the scene of the event.
I don't care. I don't even feel like writing it down. I just was wondering if I took down Cypress. Cypress? I don't believe that I did. AKA Cryfest. Cypress is as near as may be. Now, what do we learn here? More about locus and quo. They consider the boat to be chattel and not minerals, therefore belonging to the landowner per locus and quo. Yeah, I mean, that's crazy to think of it that way, but really, it's not minerals like of the land. It's like property that drifted onto the land. Thus, and yet it still belonged to the landowner and not the finder. So that's, I don't know. I think I was lost by that in the beginning. It kind of is not making, doesn't connect. McAvoy versus Medina. Finder of mislaid property in a barbershop has no rights. Mislaid property is not lost. It was voluntarily placed, and forgetting to take it away is not to lose it in the sense in which the authorities refer to speak of lost property. Michael versus First Chicago Court. Rule of mislaid, lost, and abandoned property. A finder of property acquires no rights, and mislaid property is entitled to possession of lost property against everyone except the true owner, and is entitled to keep abandoned property. Employees and other agents. In England, there is a master-servant principal agent exception that is not in accord with the weight of American authority, which grants the abandoned property to the finder. How does that work? Treasure trove. The money and coin, gold, silver plate, bullion found hidden under the earth by the Romans driven out of England was deliverable to the British Crown. Rule. Finder has... All right, then you... So where does it leave us on this case of the brooch? All right, let's just say... Depends if it's mislaid. I find it hard to believe it's mislaid when it's in someone else's house. Or lost, because I feel like it was like somewhere random in that house. But it was still in their house. So I don't even know how they owned that. But I skipped a case, Benjamin Air Carrier. I skipped a case, in re-seizure buyer is awarded cash in fuel tank, not mechanic. That's right. There is gas in some car's fuel tank. The mechanic found it, but the buyer owns it or took title to the cash. Believe it or not, that's a thing. Rolling Stone. Items found buried in the yard go to owner, not the paver that found it. Adverse possession, real property. Section 91.01, the theory and elements of adverse possession. There's the prospect theory. People losing an asset is more significant than adverse possession failure to exercise a right. Reliance, interest in property. Adverse possession has come to expect possession without interference. True owner must eject adverse possessor. Self-help, bring action to recover land before end of statute of limitations, or the adverse possessor may acquire actual title and true owner is forever barred from bringing action. Rule of increase. Adverse possession applies to chattel. For example, offspring of calf belong to the mother. Rationale. Productivity and efficiency. Punish his owner for sleeping on his rights, which is the dormancy, negligence, and tax. So these are all rationales for adverse possession. Is the person in possession, it's clearly using the land more productively and efficiently than the person who's just abandoned it. And he's sleeping on his rights. It's almost his negligence that put him in that position. And taxes used to be relevant. It's not so much of a required element everywhere anymore, but that the adverse possessor pay taxes. But yeah, at one time it was. So elements, page 74, actual entry. Entry to land is actual and exclusive, and except when claiming under an invalid deed, color of title may only claim the portion of the property actually possessed and not the entire tract. Color of title. Invalid deed gives color of title, and they may only claim the portion of the property actually possessed and not the entire tract. So that's under actual entry. Color of title is further defined. It refers to a claim based on apparently valid written instrument, deed, or judgment that for some reason is defective and invalid. In all jurisdiction, adverse possession will have constructive possession of all of the entire tract identified in the instrument, even if she's only in actual possession of part of the tract. Invalid deed, forged, grantor doesn't own or can't convey land, and grantor is incompetent. Defective judgment, court didn't have jurisdiction, court didn't have due process. These aren't really elements of adverse possession. These are just things coming under actual entry and probably have to do with color of title. Right. Okay, there you go. There's just a bad outline alignment. So the second element, we had actual entry. The second element of adverse possession was open and notorious possession. And open means that the adverse possessor must act in a way that would inform a reasonable, attentive owner of actual entry and live, mine, farm, or do acts common to ownership. And this would be so as to put a reasonably attentive property owner on notice that someone is on their property. Constructive notice is that the landowner should know what he or she should know. Of course, I wrote that. Adverse under claim of right, and so that's a third element. Can be also referred to as hostile. What it means is that the possessor does not have permission of the true owner. And hostile state of mind involves 3 tests: the objective standard, the subjective good faith standard, and the subjective bad faith aggressive standard, which is the equivalent of a trespass. The adverse possessor knows he doesn't own the real property and intends to keep it in any way. This is a requirement in some jurisdictions. More subtle versions of the objective standard, which is the state of mind, is irrelevant if the elements above are met. Applying in Georgia, Washington, and Massachusetts. Pennsylvania has an implied assumed state of mind. Subjective good faith standard, if the adverse possessor honestly believed or thought that they own the real property. That is what I interpret color of title to be. Continuous for the statutory period. Statute of limitations, that's another element. Well, continuous for the statutory period, I feel like that could very well be 2 elements. And this requires continuity that the average owner would make of a particular type of property. For example, a summer home, a ski lodge, does not pertain to camping on wild lands. The adverse possessor cannot abandon, i.e. leave with no intent to return. In some jurisdictions, the adverse possessor has to pay taxes on the property. Note that tax receipts are public knowledge. And also in some jurisdictions, there's more lenient requirements for establishing actual possession, can effectively shorten the statute of limitations. And then there's tacking and tolling right within the same section. Tolling is an extension of the statute of limitations if the true owner is disabled, of unsound mind, minority age, insanity, imprisonment, incapacity, and out of state. All of these things are fantastic, but they have to have occurred at the time that the adverse possession began. I'm just saying possessing adverse to true owner. Because, I have a house and my neighbor builds a fence and I know it's there and I am out of state, so I don't have the ability to challenge it within the statute of limitations. So I accept the fact that I'm probably acquiescing. There's no tolling for that. I had to have actually been disabled, not just out of state, as we're in here, but I had to truly be of unsound mind, minority agency, and imprisonment incapacity at the time of the adverse possession began. So it kind of would apply being out of state at the time it began, but I don't really recognize out of state from any other source besides my own outline. Ameliorative waste action accrues when a minority is of age to sue for money damages if a trustee has not defended his title from the adverse possessor. What are we talking about? Ameliorative waste action accrues when a minority is of age to sue for money damages if a trustee has not defended his title from the adverse possessor. So children who lose their parents need somebody else to kind of manage their affairs. And if they fail to do so and waste occurs, there's an action that the child that is told until the child is an adult of legal sound mind. So, or majority age. So I think that's what that means. There's a bunch of theories behind this. Helmholtz stands for the good faith subjective intent. Preble versus Maine stands for the bad faith adverse possessor should pay fair market value. Merrill stands for all adverse possessors should pay fair market value. And Michelli's economic theory of adverse possession. Don't know what that stands for. Claim of right means a reasonable basis for the belief that the property belongs to the adverse possessor or property owner, as the case may be. I feel like color of title is the same thing, but I did give a definition previously for color of title. It refers to a claim based on apparently valid written instrument, deed, or judgment that for some reason is defective and invalid. So, back to my stupid neighbor. He would have a claim of right because he legitimately believes that the property lines were where they were based on some stuff that happened 100 years ago. And in good faith, subjective good faith, we have to believe that he thinks that. But color of title would mean that he has a document that says it or tries to say it, but kind of fails to adequately set that forth in a legally recognizable way. So, agreed boundary. If there is uncertainty between neighbors as to the true bounds, an oral agreement to settle the matter is enforceable if the line is accepted a long period of time. Estoppel. One neighbor represents or engages in conduct that indicates the location of the boundary and other changes in possession and reliance on it, then the first cannot deny validity later. So, as he was building it, if I watched him build it and then I told him it was wrong when he was all finished, then I'm stopped from bringing an action against him. If I ask him if I can paint it, and then 2 years after, and then he gives me permission to paint it in 2 years, and in 2 years I paint it, I've pretty much agreed to the boundary. Case, Van Valkenburg versus Lutz. Rule, there must be shown by clear and convincing proof that actual occupation was under claim of title, for it is only premises so actually occupied and no others that are deemed to have been held adversely. I like that case. It just confused every single thing that I knew about real property to the point. So I'm glad I have the name of it now. I believe this, but that's probably just the case in some random state in 1952 and is no longer the case anymore. Manila versus Gorshi, a 15-inch walkway encroachment is not enough notoriety to sustain adverse possession because the burden of the true owner would be too high a degree of cost to survey and or too high a degree of cost and attentiveness. The rule written to decide the case was that pleadings must show exclusive, continuous, uninterrupted, visible, notorious possession against the right of interest to the true owner. Acquisition of property by subsequent possession. Howard versus Kunto. Page 95. A lake house dispute where the lakefront property was deeded incorrectly. This is actually the case that had me confused. Was deeded incorrectly. So we're talking claim of right, not color of title. No, color of title, not claim of right. It was deeded incorrectly, allowing tacking when there is privity of title, wherein the deed must describe at least some land which is occupied by adverse possession. So I just threw tacking in there, but truly I believe it was deeded one way and then sold to someone else. And they're tacking because why? Because because there was color of title. But the thing is, it was a whole different lot. They weren't at all on any of the lot that was in the deed. And where they were is relevant in some of these jurisdictions. So, they built a house on another lot. And their deed didn't have not any part of it, not like 15 feet, not like half of the lot, half of the house. It was a total miss. There's no overlap. And I feel like that was relevant in this case. What am I saying? Wherein the deed must describe at least some land which is occupied by adverse possession. Principle: continuous element can be overcome if there is no privity in land, but there was continuous adverse possession under color of title since last conveyance with privity. Privity allows tacking of continuity, but where deed describes none of the land in question, there is nothing to be tacked. So that's the rule that really, I'm the only person that knows about it somewhere. Some lake house somewhere. Tacking. Time runs against the true owner from the time when the adverse possession began, so long as adverse possession continues unbroken. It makes no difference who adversely possesses it. Tolling delays accrual of statute of limitations under disability, ends by 5 years or adds 10 years to statute of limitation for people with disabilities. Age, prisoner, unsound mind. So this delays the accrual of a statute of limitation until disability ends by 5 years and 10 years, and adds 10 years to the statute of limitation for people with disabilities. So look, I again failed in my outline to write that the disability has to exist at the time of the adverse possession. Begins. Adverse possession against the government. Adverse possession does not run against the government, local, state, and federal, because they own the land and trust for all people who should not lose but for neglect of a few government officials or employees. Adverse possession of chattel. See the O'Keefe versus Snyder art case. This is O'Keefe art stolen from a gallery, and the only means adopted to regain the property is gossiping in our community until the art is cataloged in a registry long after the statute of limitations for replevin. When O'Keefe finds the adverse possessor and the adverse possessor presents some evidence of claim of right. The discovery rule is listed here. A cause of action accrues when insured discovers or by exercise of due diligence, intelligence should have discovered facts to form a cause of action for theft or conversion. Opposes the continuity rule, statute of limitations, and allows tacking. UCC rule supports discovery in the basis of art dealings in galleries. Entrusting possession of goods to a merchant who deals in the kind of goods gives the merchant the power to transfer all the rights of the entrustor to a buyer in ordinary course of business. I mean, it just says here equity of latches, but that's what's going to protect the person in possession from the quote true owner, is that the true owner didn't bring the conversion, theft action soon enough for the possessor to be able to defend it. We're talking now like a lifetime later. People are dead. They can't defend in theft and conversion so many years after the fact, especially when they believe it to be theirs under claim of right. So acquisition by gift is the next subsection. The following elements must be met simultaneously. The donor must intend to make a present transfer of the existing interest in the property. That's a donative intent. Oral evidence of intent is sufficient. Donor must deliver possession to donee with manifest intention to make a gift. Prima facie delivery required by objective acts. 1, vivid. 2, concrete and undisputed. And 3, irrevocable. Then there's constructive delivery, which is handing keys over for access, and symbolic delivery, handing over sending symbolic evidence by writing on paper is sufficient. According to the California Civil Code 1147, i.e. seal. So acceptance by donee. I love that I just wrote done. I'm trying to say donee. So acceptance is another requirement. Traditional rule, gift promises are legally unenforceable for lack of consideration, is defended in Melvin Eisenberg, i.e. in clearings are not payable upon death. Restatement third of properties, wills, and other donative transfer, section 6.2. Engagement rings are implied conditions with some jurisdictions. Gifts are given donatio causa mortis, impending death requires witness, or inter vivos during life requires seal. Newman vs. Boast, 1898. Donatio causa mortis required intention, announced or expressed, delivery, symbolic or constructive, acceptance plus a witness. Gruen vs. Gruen, an inter vivos Klimt painting can be valid without delivery of the painting when the language "I give you the Klimt painting reserving possession for my life" divides the estate into 2 temporal periods, creating life, estate in himself, and a remainder interest in his son. So then we get to chapter 3, which is limits and possibilities of real property, personal property, and intellectual property. None of this stuff is on the bar, so it doesn't make a lot of sense to read it. But I mean, we're talking, I guess, just sheerly the fact that this is the first semester and this is the second semester. Like, that's a big jump. I'm gonna break because it's 11:30.